even every of the soccer scene, sport in Limerick, and I'm delighted to be joined once again by Noel O'Connor. Had a bit of a break there last week, brought around by myself being abroad. Noel, I know that you were very willing to do a podcast at any time, but it was my own absence that caused the break. So even though Treaty United have a break this week due to the format of the First Division and the uneven teams, we will still have a podcast, and we'll have another one before the Ulster Celtic game in the FAI Cup next week. But we're having a podcast now, an interesting podcast, maybe a kind of a mid-season review style podcast, Noel. Fair to say, Noel, the break couldn't have came maybe at a worse time for Treaty United. There was a real resurgence in the last 2 to 3 weeks. They've 3 victories in a row, 7 goals scored, 3 clean sheets, rightly back in the mix now, dragging the likes of Longford back into the playoff mix as well. It's been a really good few weeks for Tommy Barrett and his team.
Absolutely, yeah. The 3 victories have been great. I was up at the Longford game myself, and look, they were full value for it. Longford probably the slightly better team in the first half and the first 10 or 15 minutes of the second half. Their formation 4-3-3 seemed to cause Treaty a few problems, particularly in the middle of the park where they were a bit overloaded. And on the left and on the Treaty right hand side, Jack Lynch had his hands full, but he certainly ploughed away manfully. But once Willie Armshaw was taken down in the box for the penalty, it looked like there was only going to be one winner, and they kind of ran out very easy winners in the end with a third goal in extra time, and they had a corner late on which they could have probably fired into the box as well. And the way the thing were going, they might have even got a fourth.
It was a really good night, particularly in that Longford game, because there hadn't been any goals, as we'd mentioned in the week leading up to that game, Noel, between the sides. Because to get an emphatic 3-0 win at home was a really good building on the Cove one. Then you go to Bray, 2-0 victory there as well. It's really building up now to be exciting. Me and you both admitted that we had Longford tailed off, that they were absolute guarantees for this playoff place. But now with Wexford and Treaty putting in runs at the moment, Longford have been dragged right back into this. As we sit here tonight, just before the games this evening, have Longford with a game in hand, Treaty level on points with Longford. Longford have a game in hand, but that is against Waterford away in the RSC, so that is no gimme by any stretch. Wexford, a further 3 points behind, also have a game in hand, on Treaty, but they have Cork City at home, so that's not a gimme either. So, Treaty will be looking on, hoping that maybe it will be as you were after tonight's fixtures.
Yeah, and I think there's a fair chance it will be, and you would wonder, is there something going on in Longford? I did think that they kind of threw in the towel very quickly from a team that was so strong and going so well and had some really, really good results throughout the season, like a 0-0 draw at home to Cork, and they beat Galway there after the last bank holiday weekend, if I remember rightly. That's only a few weeks ago. And what really kind of compounded was their capitulation, if you like, last weekend to their local rivals at Athlone Town. It was at Athlone's second win of the season, I think, but certainly, to lose 3-1 at home to Athlone, there's certainly something amiss up there. Haven't really heard anything, or there hasn't been any whispers, but it is certainly something that they need to address fairly quickly, or they certainly will miss out on the playoff places with the form of Wexford and Treaty United.
Certainly, and I know the time since we last spoke, Noel, obviously the July transfer window brings around a lot of incomings and outgoings of most teams, to be fair. Treaty United have brought in 3 players. They have Success Udigan coming in from Athlone, Resurgent from Cove, and Darren Collins from Sligo Rovers, who admittedly I know very little about. I know he's made a couple of sparing appearances for Sligo off the bench, if I'm stand corrected. I suppose it's funny in one way, because you're looking at the market that Treaty are dealing in, and Tommy Barrett says it regularly. Obviously, they can't offer a lot financially. You look at the players they brought in. Ben Reardon, actually, funnily enough, had only scored an own goal for Cove against Treaty in the game there 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was mostly on the substitutes bench, as Tommy alluded to. We know that Success Udigan was in a similar situation and did come off the bench against Treaty recently for Athlone. So although I suppose you could look at it in the way of both of those players are coming from teams below you, they were on the substitutes bench, might worry you slightly. On the other hand, I suppose they are players who have had success in recent clubs, or some success in recent times, and bring a bit of experience on the other hand, and maybe some strength to the squad that was needed, maybe particularly on the substitutes bench as well.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing. Guys that have a bit of experience in the league as well. I just looked up over Ben O'Riordan. Like, in fairness to him, he's been around for 6 or 7 years. He's 25. Seemed to have made more appearances 6 or 7 years ago when Cove were, if you like, more successful when they were runners up in the league and got to the League Cup final. He was obviously brought into the club by Stephen Henderson. In the last couple of years, his appearances seem to have tailed off a little bit, and maybe he just needs a new challenge. He's obviously prepared to travel to play, which is a good sign. And he came on against Bray when Jack Lynch went off injured, and I thought that he acquitted himself quite well. Success Erdogan has a really kind of a lot of hope around him in the last few years. He won an under-19 title with Waterford and then went to St. Pat's. And last season he was down in Wexford, and like in the pre-season there was a lot of talk about him, making an impact during the season, and he did do the same. He came on in a few matches but didn't really make a huge impact, and then he went at loan. So look, you'll be hoping that it happens for him, and it could in Treaty. I think he's a good sign for Treaty in terms of his pace, particularly when Enda Curran isn't playing, because they certainly need someone that keeps the back four honest and gives them a chance to get higher up the pitch. Because when things aren't going well for them, particularly against the better teams, one of the criticisms is always that that they get very deep and they're all in their own half and they can't seem to get out. So at least a guy with a bit of pace like he has would certainly be a help in that area. The lad from Sligo, Daniel Collins, don't know a whole lot about him. I think he's a Mayo lad. He has a few appearances in the Premier League. And look, I think we spoke there a while ago about the improvement in the fortunes of Treaty, and particularly keeping clean sheets. And I think it certainly has a lot to do with the fact that there's been a couple of changes in that back four with Joe Gorman gone and Charlie Fleming as well. They look a lot more settled back four. They seem to work together. The chemistry seems to be a lot better between them. We would have said that certainly about Joe Gorman, that the chemistry didn't seem to be right when he was playing. I've never been a fan of Charlie Fleming in terms of his defensive prowess, and I think since those two lads are gone, we certainly have been borne out what we've been saying, and they certainly look a lot more solid at the back. And when Enda Curran is fitting well, they're certainly a very, very decent team.
Absolutely. We've said it all year, and we've probably seemed like a broken record about Enda Curran, Noel, to be fair. But he proved the point to everyone that when he does play, unfortunately he has suffered injuries, but he got 4 goals in 2 games and just showed his worth to the team, and a couple of very good finishes too, as we know he's capable of.
Yeah, and I just wonder, because it was, and of course, some of you said before in terms of injury updates and that, we don't seem to get a lot of them, but I just wonder, was there a few issues maybe between himself and Joe Gorman? Seemed to be missing a lot, and we didn't really hear, was it any kind of a serious injury? They certainly look a lot more of a united bunch now, and they seem to be playing together and playing for each other, and it's a bit like the Treaty of old. And we said that at the start about Enda Curran. He's probably a Premier League striker, certainly has a lot of talent. We know Galway wanted to sign him at the start of the season, and the key really is to keep him fit. And I think keep him on the pitch as well. He seems to be happier to be playing away, and as long as he's fit to go, I think that he should play as many minutes as possible now between now and the end of the season.
And I'm sure with his form, that will be the aim for Tommy Barrett and his management team. Going to the other end of the field, it was brought through the Treaty United social media pages to my attention, if I'm honest, about Jack Brady breaking the record that was set. Obviously, the team is only a year and a half in existence, the senior team, but Jack Brady now has 9 clean sheets, which overtakes Ty Grine. In some ways, I suppose, no, that kind of went under the radar, because when Treaty have been conceding goals, they have conceded quite a few in the games that they've lost. You wouldn't actually think that they've had 9 clean sheets with Jack in goals. And I suppose in another way, it kind of makes it even a bit more strange that, Conor Wynn came in for a few games if Jack has been that influential to the team. Although I know I can understand trying to give the understudy a bit of game time. But yeah, I felt maybe that it went a bit under the radar with the amount of clean sheets that Jack has, considering how lauded Ty Grine was last season with Treaty.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And look, it's obviously a credit to the whole team keeping a clean sheet, and the back four as well. And I suppose if you go through them, they're certainly getting more of them now than they were, say, in that middle part of the season, I think, when they certainly had some issues there at the back. But overall, listen, Jack Brady's been very good. I was a bit surprised that he was left out, because while he did make a couple of errors, you wouldn't really put him down as howlers. And I said that you needed to be sure that your number two was going to, when he did come in, certainly do better than the incumbent. And I don't think that happened. Obviously not against Cork anyway. I know they kept a clean sheet against Galway, but he kind of settled back in again seamlessly, which is good. And I'm sure Tom will be loath to change him now between now and the end of the season.
Definitely, and it brings us on to an interesting topic, Noel, at this point of the season, around the midway point of the campaign, or just over. But it's the Treaty United Player of the Season so far that both of us will have picked. I know from going through it, you have a couple of candidates. Obviously, you mentioned Jack Brady there, but you had another candidate. Obviously, Enda Curran's got 10 goals, has been very influential, but has missed a few games as well in the meantime. I know that for myself, I picked what I felt was a relatively obvious choice in Cali Mcnamara, just in his importance to the team. Noel, he's kind of moulding into maybe a bit of a leader in the team in some ways, because he's back there at centre back now with Sean Gearns, asked to play there for the first time, particularly at this level. Anyway, I'm not sure if he ever played there before. Has taken it in his stride, to be fair, was a real important cog in midfield. It's funny thinking back to maybe just over a year and a half ago, Noel, when the squad was being assembled. I do remember Tommy Barrett having a decision to make, because he thought you'd only be allowed to sign 25 players. Dean George was supposed to come in at the time, and they thought they were only allowed to sign 25. And I think it was Callum McNamara that might have been getting I wouldn't say the boot, but being told that maybe your time isn't now at that stage. But they were allowed to sign the 26, and he was there. He was important last year. I think he's just evolved again this season. So that would be my pick. What about yourself?
Yeah, look, it's hard to disagree with that. He's been fantastic. I was championing his cause all last year as well. I thought the games he played, he was really, really good. Like, for such a young chap to go from centre midfield into centre half and to play so well, just shows you what a talented player he is. And you're right, there is a touch of leadership qualities about him as well. And to be fair, it's probably the weakest area in the pitch now for Treaty, the centre midfield area. And they are missing him in there. And I suppose, look, it just shows you how good he's been. It's very hard to not consider a guy who's got 10 goals for you and has been a match winner on so many occasions in Enda Curran. And just behind them, in fairness to Matt Keane, I think his consistency has been very, very good as well. And Mark Ludden has given his usual performance. Has had a small bit of a dip there a few games ago, but certainly there's a pep in his step again. He was a really prominent guy in that Longford game, and I thought he showed a lot of leadership and experience as well, and certainly seems to be a very happy camper at the moment. So I think they're a very united group now, and certainly those couple of changes in the dressing room have helped the whole group.
Yeah, certainly. And speaking in an overall sense, Noel, we'll talk about maybe how would you assess, is the question really, Treaty's season up until this point. I know from my own point of view, you almost feel like you have to break it into blocks. They started relatively well, had a poor middle area in that, say, half of the season. And then now, obviously, as we said, the break has probably came at the worst possible time with the form. It's funny how fickle you can be in football, because if they'd come in with 3 losses, you might have been looking at it with a very pessimistic look. Now you're looking at it with an optimistic look that, you would have been expecting Galway, Cork and Waterford to run away in that respect with the form. Now they've dragged Longford back in. So it's really what you were hoping for and what you would have expected from this Treaty side heading into this point of the season, I would think. Yeah,
absolutely. I suppose the only thing that I didn't expect it either with that is that they're so far adrift maybe of the particularly the first two. Kind of didn't see that coming, but I think they're in for one hell of a battle for that playoff place, and it is great where they are. But I'm sure Longford will get a few players in as well in the next couple of weeks. And we have spoken about Wexford. They look very, very settled. They've got some really good results since the break. And I think it will really go right down to the wire there in the last few games before we really know. And if you think about last year, with 3 games to go, Treaty had cemented that playoff place. And I'm not saying it's a disimprovement or anything, but I think that it'll really go right to the wire. And I think it'll probably make for more enjoyment for us and obviously for the fans as well, that there'll be games and they'll really be at stake. And not only the games that you're playing in, but certainly you'll have eyes on a couple of other games that are happening in around as well.
Absolutely, and that certainly starts tonight. I know we'll probably be tuning into a game or two after this podcast as well, Noel. Just to bring us on to maybe another situation here, in that I'm looking at surprise packages, Noel, and disappointing teams so far this year. I just had a quick look at it. You mentioned them there. It's hard. None of the top three would be a surprise package, obviously. You're expecting them to be up there. You, rather than more so than me, were expecting Longford to be where they are, but I wouldn't say they were a surprise package. I don't think Treaty are surprise. Wexford are probably as close in this division as you can get to a surprise package this year. They've shown a lot of resolve in recent weeks, a lot of late victories, grabbed the late draw, Turner's Cross. Ian Ryan certainly has improved them massively compared to last season. So if you were to go for a surprise package, I think that Wexford have been that, even though they have a lot of quality in the squad, and we did expect them to improve on last season. And the most disappointing team, in my opinion, would have to be Bray Wanderers in their performance. People were saying up until recently that you'd expect them to go and make a fist of the playoffs. I think that's certainly gone now. But, you talk about mergers, Noel, and I have heard that. And you'd wonder, though, how much that would affect players in the pitch. I mean, a lot of these players have been around for a long time. A lot of them have played with Bray. A lot of them have played with Cavantilli. They've Pat Devlin there as the manager. Experience-wise and players that have been in the league, I think they should be performing definitely a little better, at least in this league. I think their performances have left a lot to be desired as well. I know they've signed Joe Gorman too, and funnily enough, I suppose, and ironically enough, from a Treaty point of view, he got sent off last week in his debut against them, which was probably summed up his season so far. But I think Bray have certainly been most disappointing. What would you say in your surprise package and disappointing team?
Yeah, look, I didn't really expect anything great from Bray, to be honest with you. And I did have them more or less where they are now. I think their form even has tailed off a little bit worse even than I thought. Just a couple of players to me, I think that they look like they're probably a year or two beyond their sell-by date, if you like. The lad who's playing up front with him, whose name escapes me now at the moment, no, the lad that was with Athlone last year.
Yes, that's Curtis Byrne.
Curtis Byrne, really didn't do anything in Athlone last season, and just has continued. You're going into another season now, and it's the same kind of farm line. I see Kieran Marty Waters only coming on. Look, he was lethal there a few years ago. Hasn't really done a whole lot in the last 18 months, and particularly with summer football in the league. Lads like those lads probably used to get away with it maybe 10 or 15 years ago with the winter football, but certainly it just looks like it's gone a little bit beyond them. They probably need to get a few more young players in and just see, can they give them experience for next season? But certainly I think it's all beyond them now. I must say I am disappointed with Cove as well, particularly with the change of manager. They got rid of Darren Murphy, and I think they haven't picked up a point since Shane Keegan went in there. It's 3 defeats and a couple of heavy defeats as well. I'm racking my brain here to think if they've even scored a goal. So Cove are always a competitive side. They'd always be difficult to beat. They'd always pick up a few points here and there, but certainly this year they have been kind of miles off it. And I am disappointed with Waterford as well. I really had high hopes for them. Very good squad, full-time professional. It didn't work out with Ian Morris, which was fair enough, and they put the local lads in like Breener. They go on an 8-match unbeaten run, I think an 8-match winning run, if I'm not mistaken. They won 8 on the bounce. And then they decide to appoint another manager. And, he loses the second game, and your mind is just boggling, and say, well, look, they could surely let the lads in. I mean, the worst thing that could have happened was they could have won the league, and if they didn't, they were going to get in the playoffs anyway. So I just didn't see the sense in bringing in another manager and upsetting a team that had won 8 in the bounce. But what do I know? Definitely Wexford are the surprise packages because, every year there's a bit of hope there, but it never really amounts to anything. But certainly there's something tangible there now. They seem to have the bit between their teeth, and a couple of weeks ago I felt that they really were going to put the Treaty to the pin of their collar for that last playoff place. But with what has happened in Athlone or with Longford in the last few weeks, well, then it may well be that Treaty and Wexford squeeze in, so you just don't know. But the next couple of weeks will certainly tell us, and what players are signed for which club, because by the first week in August, all that business will be done and dusted, and we'll have a clearer picture of how it's going to unfurl in the next couple of months.
Oh, look, Conor, disappointed with 1/3 of the teams in the league. Shocker. But yes, I suppose I definitely would agree with you on 2 of those anyway. And we did expect, obviously, Athlone to struggle this season as well. So it was hard to pick between the 9 teams who was surprise package and disappointed. On a final note, Noel, it was actually something we haven't discussed really on the podcast, or maybe outside the podcast, but I know it's come to my attention, the amount of players in the last few weeks that have moved to English clubs from the League of Ireland. There's 2 ways of looking at it, I suppose. It's a lot of people are very angry, maybe, and disappointed with the lack of, I suppose some people are calling lack of respect from English clubs, but they've just seen a market where they can pick up players on the cheap in the lower leagues, championship downwards. Likes of Ed McGinty gone to Oxford, and Owen Toll in recent weeks gone to Bolton. They're seizing on that opportunity. I mean, for the last 15 years, English clubs have been taking Irish players quite regularly enough. Then again, I suppose you have to look at it on the opportunity for those players as well, Noel. And, obviously the League of Ireland clubs, don't really have a lot of bargaining tool when they're going into these deals.
Certainly not initially. I think that's very true. And I suppose the good thing about it is you go back 25 or 30 years ago, it was 14, 15 and 16-year-olds going over. I think it's a lot better that they are going over at 19, 20 and 21 with a couple of years experience in the league. And it does show you how good the league is. And there is a lot of players now in the Championship and League One in particular. And we see some of them kind of sprinkling back into the international setup 4 or 5 years later. Look, it's certainly important that whoever's in charge of these clubs, and the deals are certainly quite secretive, but I think the best they can do is to try and get as much as they can initially, but certainly make sure that they have a lot of clauses in terms of any kind of success that these players may have. I know people scoffed at the likes of when we were involved in Cork, Kevin Doyle going to England, and a clause that they get more 10% of the transfer fee, which turned out to be a considerable amount of money, even though people really didn't think that he was good enough to go at all. And Shane Long the same, who's just signed a contract with Reading, and he's gone since 2005. And it's now 2023. So what a fantastic career that he has had in England, and hopefully from now on, some of that money will start to filter back into the league. But I suppose initially it's difficult, but it's important who's involved in these clubs that they have the wherewithal to strike a hard bargain.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, two of our own Limerick natives, Noel, I'd be remiss of me not to mention the fact that they were involved in a huge game for Sligo Rovers last night as well. Will Fitzgerald and Carl Sullivan, both involved in a huge win for Sligo Rovers. And I saw that Motherwell said I think it's all Rover on the paper. That was the slant that the Scottish paper was thinking, and said they lost to the Irish Minnows. But a huge result for Sligo away from home. I suppose it's all about building on it now, but brilliant to see those 2 youngsters who in the not so distant past were Limerick FC players and playing senior soccer at this level.
Yeah, look, it's great to see them do well. Particularly for Will Fitzgerald, I think he's kind of struggled a small bit in the last few years. I know Carlos Sullivan had a great season last year in Harps, and they were very disappointed to see him go. But look, we like to see these guys having success, and hopefully there'll be plenty more of them in